Anyway, okay, 1983. So we're talking about culture, and they were trying to figure out how different areas have different cultures. And this was IBM in 1983. Of course, IBM kind of ran the world in 1983. So they were trying to figure out whether executives from different parts of the world acted differently. And so they hired a psychologist by the name of Gert Hofstede to assess the employees' opinions and interests. They were having problems. This was right after there were all kinds of social revolutions going on all over the world. So they decided that maybe they should figure. Oh, I did that. That maybe they should figure out what people were thinking. So Hofstede administered questionnaires to 117,000 employees in 40 different countries. IBM was one of the major employers around the world. Hofstede was able to map the individualism of all the employees in each country, 40 different countries. The country scores show a clear and striking pattern, strangely. Well, it's not that strange, I guess, if you think about it. Whoops, went the wrong way. Okay. Hofstede discovered that most individualistic countries in the world, the most individualistic country in the world is the United States. Since then, we've discovered that we ain't the most individualistic country in the world. Tends to be France. France is the most individualistic country. The United States, in his study, the United States was followed very closely by all the English-speaking countries in the Western, and by Western European nations, English-speaking countries, Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand. So there you go. All the English, and the United Kingdom, of course. And then all the other Western nations. Countries that scored high in collectivism were various nations in Latin America. That's South and Central America. And Asia. And of course, Asia includes India, Malaysia, China, Japan, Indonesia. Those are all the Asian countries. The Philippines. Other research has found similar results to Hofstede's. Collectivism, so what we really need to talk about is collectivism and individualism. Collectivism has been found to dominate in Asia, Africa, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and the South Pacific. Once upon a time, we got real upset in the United States about all the immigrants coming in from South and Eastern Europe. And the reason we got so upset, or the reason the people in the United States got so upset, was because most of the immigrants coming into the United States from the first European incursion until the 20th century, most of the immigrants coming in were from Western Europe. They were Germans, French, especially English, and a lot of Irish were coming into the United States. Well, they primarily had the same ideas. They spoke the same, kind of the same languages. There were people from Scandinavia. That was okay. We didn't mind those individuals coming in. Then all of a sudden, we had this huge influx of people coming in from Italy, from Greece, from Spain. We weren't real happy about that. Then people were coming in from Austria. They were coming in from Hungary. They were coming in from the Bohemian section of Germany. They were coming in from Czechoslovakia. Didn't like that. And the reason we didn't like that was because they had a different religion. That and the fact that they looked different. Why did they look different? They all had black hair. Now, I know that doesn't make any sense. Why should hair make a difference to anything? But the reality was, because they were those people, and because they were Catholic, we saw them all black-haired people as not good. So there was a lot of prejudice against people who were Catholic, and there was prejudice against people who had black hair, as confusing as that is. And as it turns out, the people from Southern Europe and the people from Eastern Europe are not only Catholic, but they're also collectivistic. Now, what does religion have to do with collectivism or individualism? Well, Catholicism teaches you that there's one guy in charge, and that guy, well, besides God, the one guy in charge is the Pope. And since the Pope is in charge, that makes it collectivistic. Yes, ma'am?
What does collectivism?
Collectivistic means that, individualistic means that each individual has autonomy. They feel like they're in charge of themselves. Collectivism feels like the group is in charge. So
they're in charge as a group.
I'm sorry?
They're in charge as a group.
The group is in charge of all people.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so the group tells each individual what to do. In individualism, the individual decides what he's going to do for himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like dependent, interdependent.
Yeah, exactly. Fits very well. So we see that there's a lot of collectivism in the world. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of people in the world, 80% of the world's population, live in collectivistic countries. And one of the reasons that people were coming to the United States was because the United States was less collectivistic. It was more individualistic. So if you wanted to do something and the people in your country didn't want you to do it, then if you came to the United States, you could be your own person. And that's one of the reasons so many people came to the United States. It's also a reason that they came to Canada, but Canada is less individualistic than the United States is. So we have all of these, all the people in the world, and a lot of people do want to come to the United States, and the reason is so that they can do what they want to do. Most people participate in collectivistic cultures where interdependent selves are more common. These countries encompass 80% of the world's population, as I said before. The state, strangely enough, with the highest collectivism score by far is Hawaii. And one of the reasons the Hawaiians are so collectivistic is because they have so many people of Asian ancestry. If you've ever been around somebody of Asian ancestry, they have to check with their mother, they have to check with their father before they can do things. They are not independent like a teenager in Colorado. A teenager in Colorado just goes and does what they want. They don't call their parents out. Why? Because they're more individualistic. But people of Asian ancestry tend to be more collectivistic because that's the way they're raised. The next most collectivistic states were Utah and the states of the Confederate South. Now, why in the world would Utah be so collectivistic? What is so collectivistic about people in Utah?
There's Mormons down there?
Mormons, exactly. It's the Mormons. And why would the South be collectivistic over the North? What's the difference between the South and the North? Some of this is historical. It turns out that most of the immigrants didn't go to the South, they went to the North. So individualistic people that came over on boats decided that were looking for jobs, they couldn't find them in the South, so they went to the North. Why did they leave their home countries? They left their home countries because they wanted to be different. They wanted to be individualistic. So they came to the United States so that they could be whoever they wanted to be. Be what you want to be. That's what they say. So people in the South, of course, it's more agricultural. Since it's more agricultural, the agriculture in the South was cotton, tobacco. Because of that, people that came into the South needed to be more cooperative. And of course, they tried to rebel against the North, and that's one of the reasons why they're more collectivistic. So, and they're more respectful to their elders. They're more respectful to other individuals. The least collectivistic states, and this should be a shock to you, is the Mountain West. Wait a minute, that's where we live. We live in the Mountain West. The Great Plains, so that's people in Kansas and Nebraska, Oklahoma, Iowa, Colorado, that's the Great Plains. The Northeast, that would be Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York. And the Midwest, that's the Rust Belt. That's where I come from. I come from the Rust Belt. So maybe one of the reasons why I don't feel alienated here there is because I come from an individualistic state, and this is an individualistic state, so I don't feel very alienated. However, if I lived in Utah, I'd probably feel fairly alien, since I'm not a very religious person. Individualism varies as a function of social class. Specifically, people from higher socioeconomic backgrounds tend to have more independent selves than those from poorer backgrounds within the same country. If you're poor and you're looking for a job, you'll do just about anything for that to get that job. And when you get that job, you want to keep the job. And since you want to keep the job, you do what you're told to do. And because of that, poorer people tend to be more collectivistic. Wealthier Icelandic children tend to describe themselves more in terms of inner psychological traits than poorer Icelandic children do. Now we're going to talk about middle-class Americans, which is kind of interesting. I never even thought about this until I started studying Division III schools. Division III schools are small schools that don't have athletic scholarships. That's the difference between Division III, Division II, and Division I. It has to do with the NCAA. So if you look at Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, the Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, New York, if you look at all of those states, you see a lot of colleges. There's just tons and tons of colleges. If you look at the colleges in the state of Arizona, how many private colleges are there in the state of Arizona? Can you think of any private colleges in the state of Arizona? You have NAU, U of A, and you have ASU. Those are all state schools. You've got Eastern Arizona. Isn't there an Eastern Arizona? Oh, it's Eastern New Mexico. That's in Portales.
What is it, Eastern Arizona?
There is an Eastern Arizona College, University?
Well, not university, but I think it's down there in Globe.
Okay. It's a state college. Then you've got tribal colleges. There's Pima Community College, there's us, there's NAU, Maricopa Community College, which is a state college. Are there any private colleges in Arizona? Private colleges in Arizona. I think you're going to find out.
What about Grand Canyon University?
Yeah, that's a private Christian affordable college.
Right, Grand Canyon
Ottawa University.
Okay. All right. How many Division III colleges are there in this state?
Prescott College, Embry-Riddle, Arizona.
You're not doing very well. Embry-Riddle is out of Georgia. No, hardly any. Okay, so there are hardly any. If we go to another state, if we go to Ohio, if we go to Pennsylvania, if we go to Indiana or Michigan or Wisconsin, tons and tons of small private colleges. Most of them are affiliated with a church, but they're all private colleges, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason why there are so many private colleges, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Middle-class American parents emphasize the importance of self-direction to their children, whereas working-class American parents place greater value on conforming to authority figures. This has to do with the election. We're going to elect a president again in November, and the reason the reason that this is such a toss-up is because there are a lot of people that are going to vote for the bossy guy, the bully. They're going to vote for Trump. Now, why in the world would anybody vote for Trump when he does all this crappy stuff? He does some really negative things. He says negative things about the military. He does negative things to the military. Usually he says nice things about the military, but then he messes them over. He's taken billions of dollars from the military. He kicked out the lieutenant colonel that testified against him, even though as a military member he had to tell the truth. He had no choice. But he still fired the guy. He insulted the military. And he does it over and over and over again. When the Iranians bombed the bases in Iraq.
So what happened? The impeachment didn't go through?
I'm sorry?
The impeachment didn't go through?
No, he was acquitted. Sorry. You missed it, yeah, he's
Yeah.
still president of the United States. So what did he do this week? He pardoned 10 people. And who are these 10 people? They're all rich guys. He pardoned all these rich guys that had been caught with their fingers in the till. Pardoned them all. It was just really interesting. So, but he still may be re-elected president. And the reason is right here. Because there are a lot of people who react to the fact that he is in charge. They like people who are in charge and tell them that they're in charge. They don't care if he lies. They don't care if he defrauds people. They don't care. And the reason they don't care is because this is what they're looking for. They're looking for authority. And they will respond to authority, no matter what he does. So he may be re-elected president of the United States, despite the fact he was impeached. Impeached just means that they had a trial. He was acquitted, but they may still just re-elect the guy. It could happen. So where is he going to win states? Well, he's going to win states in the South. He's going to win all the southern states. He's going to win Utah. He's going to win places where authority is accepted. And of course, that includes, whoops, I went the wrong way again. That includes Utah and the southern states. Working class, and he's going to get all the votes from the working class Americans, because working class Americans like authority figures, even if they're jackasses, even if they swear it, even if he swears at them. He said when he was running for president last time that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and nobody would care. He wouldn't lose any votes. And he's right. He does all kinds of crazy stuff. He embraced the Russians, and he will still not lose votes. People who hate Russia, military people, will vote for him, despite the fact that when I was in the military, we were fighting against Russia. They were our enemy. They've been our enemy since the end of World War II. But he embraced them. And despite that, people will still vote for him. You'll see. It's really kind of fascinating. Or, I guess, if you find politics fascinating. Interdependent messages are a better fit with American students from working class backgrounds. Some of the highest concentrations of universities in the United States are in the Northeast and the Midwest, where individualism is more pronounced. So the more individualistic the state is, the more independent colleges they have, the more small colleges that they have. So if we're looking at all the small colleges in the United States, all we have to do is go to Wisconsin, Minnesota, well, not Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio,
Kansas.
Pennsylvania, New York,
Kansas.
Yeah, that's where we find all the small colleges. And hardly any in Arizona, maybe 2. Texas has 3. Texas, the second largest state in the union, has 3 small colleges. But Indiana has like 15. Psychological research within the United States has been largely conducted with participants who are even more individualistic than most other Americans. And this is part of the problem that we do have. And this is one of the things that we learned in the last election. Trump was saying that his polls were better than anybody else's polls. And he was right, because when CNN and Quinnipiac and all the other polls were being done, they were polling individuals who were more individualistic. And he was polling people from the South. He was polling people, working class families from the Ohio and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And he had a better idea of how people were actually going to vote. And that's what happened. Other cultural dimensions that researchers have investigated include societal tightness versus looseness. Societal tightness characterizes how strong cultural norms are and how tolerant cultures are of deviant behavior. This predicts levels of prevention, focus, impulse control, and self-regulation. So if we're looking at loose and tightness, a country that would be tight would be one that punishes deviant behavior, where you can't do things. A lot of the Muslim countries have very tight political structures. The United States is relatively loose. You can do just about anything in the United States. Once upon a time, of course, the homosexuality was illegal in the United States, but now, of course, it's legal. Not to the extent that we have an individual running for president who is gay and is married to a man. It's a man married to another man, and he's running for president of the United States. And right now, he's running second in the Democratic election. That's Pete Buttigieg is the guy that I'm talking about, and he's second. So it should be interesting. I don't think he's going to get the nomination, but he still has lots of people that really like him. They don't care about the fact that he's married to another guy, I guess. There are people that don't like that. They think that that's not right, even though it's legal in the United States.
We all vote for him instead of Trump.
Well, which is not illogical. Another cultural dimension that has been investigated are cultural values, values for universalism, benevolence, conformity, tradition, security, power, achievement, hedonism, stimulation, and self-direction. Values for universalism, I was talking to Jeremiah today, and he said, a student came in and said that, what did he say? The Navajo Nation is ethnocentric. And I said, geez, that's a first. Ethnocentric means that you concentrate on your own culture and you reject all other cultures. Yeah. And people have argued, and probably Sean wrote this once upon a time, that the Navajo Nation isn't ethnocentric because you embrace all other tribes. Well, the reality is you think all Indians are Navajos. That's what you think. I was talking to somebody the other day, and he was saying that when he went to Gallup, he thought everybody was Navajo until somebody started speaking Zuni to him, and he thought the guy was a Navajo. And you know, he lived on the reservation, but when he went to Gallup, he assumed everybody else, all the non-white and black people, were Navajos because they looked like him, or at least he thought that. Half these people were Hopi and Apache and Zuni and Tohono O'odham and Pima. I mean, they were just about anything, but he saw them all as Navajos. Not that he would have embraced them if he knew who they were, but he just assumed that they were all Navajos, which is something that is a little difficult for me to understand. See, other tribes don't do that. Other tribes recognize other tribes, even if they don't like them. When you powwow in Montana, you powwow with all the tribes, and then you have intertribal dances. It's not that big a deal. And the Crows wear different regalia than everybody else does, and nobody likes the Crows. That's on tape. Nobody likes the Crows. But they still dance with them, and they still dance with them in intertribals.
I think they don't like each other because of competition.
Competition for what? What are you
Dancing.
competing for?
They place in competition. Compete against each other.
I heard the Sioux like the Crows now.
Who likes the Crows?
The Sioux?
The Crows speak a Siouxan language. They can talk to each other. Now, why do the Sioux like the Crows? Is this a joke?
No, I heard it recently. I think it was last night. They showed a video at the library, and they were talking about that Standing Rock thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Crows were real big.
That was when these tribes that never agree with each other all came together. And,
Sure.
yeah.
But see, they do that with every powwow. Every powwow in North Dakota and South Dakota and Montana and Idaho and Washington, Oregon, everybody gets together. And the fun thing is, they try to make sure that not just their people win all the prizes. They try to make sure that somebody from another reservation wins some of the prizes. And they do that specifically. So they'll have a dance-off between, a local guy and somebody from Wisconsin, and the guy from Wisconsin wins. Because they're trying to promote intertribalism, I guess. Not pan-Indianism, but intertribalism. Anyway, universalism. What else? Other cultural dimensions have been investigated: power distance, uncertainty avoidance, vertical horizontal social structure. If you look at England, of course, if you're a member of the royal family, you're not supposed to marry down. Nobody can marry into the royal family. Look what happened with poor Meghan Markle. She marries one of the princes, and now I think they're coming to the United States. They're no longer.
They stepped down.
They had to step down because, of course, this has happened before. A royal marrying a commoner. They have to step down. What do I do with my keys? I must be in my other pocket. Power distance, uncertainty avoidance, vertical, horizontal social structure, relationship structures, context dependence, social cynicism, and complexity. Cultures and heterogeneity. One of the difficulties in studying cultural psychology is that individuals tend to be varied and complex. Cultures are highly variable and are resistant to categorization. The reality is, I can talk about Navajos as if all of you guys are the same, but the reality is you're not. You're nowhere close to the same. It's just like you guys talking about white people, like we're all we're all Kit Carson, but the reality is that there was only one Kit Carson, and most Americans didn't have a clue what they were doing to you guys. Most Americans lived east of the Mississippi River, as most Americans still live east of the Mississippi River, and they didn't know what was going on. They had no idea. I'm the first member of my family to ever live west of the Mississippi River. So the people in 1860s, and actually my family was fighting in the Civil War, so they really didn't care about what was going on with the Indians in the West, because they were still trying to fight off the Confederates. They were trying to win the war. And the last thing they cared about was what Kit Carson was doing to the Navajos at Fort Sumner. Last thing in the world that they cared about. Sorry. But you can blame them all you want, but it doesn't really make any sense because they had no clue. None whatsoever. They were fighting battles in the Civil War. They were being butchered or butchering people who looked just like them. Anyway, but you can do anything you want, I guess. All cultures are highly heterogeneous and contain a great variety of people. Almost all cultures are. There are some cultures that aren't. The Japanese, for example, 98% of all people living in Japan are Japanese. What does that mean? That means 2% of the population is not Japanese. So what do they look like? Well, they're Chinese. Most of them are Korean, actually. And you guys can't tell the difference between Koreans and Japanese anyway. I can, because I've lived in both countries. But it's a fairly heterogeneous place. If you listen to Wilson tells you that Navajos should only marry other Navajos. Somebody came into my office this morning and they confessed to me that they have ancestry that isn't Navajo. And they were about ready to cry, and I was thinking, why would you cry? This is not that big a deal as far as I'm concerned. Yes, one of my ancestors is Spanish, and one of my ancestors was Biligana. How far back was it? Well, it's like in the 19th century, I had a relative who was white. Is that something that you need to even talk about? I have a friend that comes to my house from time to time, and he says that people are being mean to him because he's half Apache. Well, he's not half Apache. His grandmother was Apache. That doesn't make him half Apache. His grandmother was Apache.
I don't know, I think there's certain people that have attitudes like that.
Yeah.
Not all Navajos are like that.
Yeah. Oh, I know. That's what I'm saying. Varied cultures, okay. So we have varied cultures. Anyway, so even though Wilson wants only Navajos to marry other Navajos, it just doesn't happen. And as a matter of fact, I mean, you start out with 4 clans and now you have, 124?
Yeah.
124 clans, there's a reason.
I see it in some, like, staff or students like that. Look at me somehow, but it don't matter to me.
Yeah. Nakai. That's
Nakai.
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 See, I'll never pronounce it
Sound.
correctly. Mexican. Mexican, sure. Okay. So if you have a clan that is whatever Sean just said, then, right, don't you have a clan that is, okay.
Nakai.
That means that those people are Mexican.
You?
No.
One of Marius's clans is the Jemez. The Jemez is a pueblo up in New Mexico, it's up north of Santa Fe.
Yep.
Yeah,
Me and him were both for the same group.
there you go. So, you have adopted this as a clan, but the reality is you have ancestors that are from another group.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. You started out with 4 clans.
Well, actually, they say that after the long walk,
Right.
the Treaty of 1868,
Right.
on the way back, some Navajos stopped by there.
Right.
Jemez, and adopted that clan. I don't know if they were bred into it or if they just got the clan from somebody.
Are you trying to tell me that there wasn't any intermarrying that took place?
I'm not sure.
But that's the only way.
I know.
Yeah. I don't know. That's like one thing that I always wondered about these adopted clans. Like,
Sure.
did they intermarry and interbreed first? Then the child became that clan?
Sure.
To start with? Or did they just say, okay, we're gonna give you this clan, you can be a part of us? It's okay, all right.
Well, eventually somebody intermarried, and eventually that ancestry, that bloodline, came into the Navajo people. That's why you have 124 clans, and you used to have only 4. Every time you adopted a new clan, you adopted those people, and those people became Navajo. But their bloodline, whether it's from Mexico or whether it's from the Jemez Pueblo, that bloodline is now part of the Navajo people.
Okay.
I'm not Pueblo though. My clan.
You are if you're Jemez.
I'm 100% Navajo. 120%.
No, not Kai. Yeah. Okay.
No, not Kai.
Cultural differences, this book describes reflect general patterns of differences and not all or nothing statements. And of course, you can't really make that kind of a statement. A number of researchers have identified women as more interdependent than men are. The features of independent entities seem more characteristic of men than of women. Sorry. There are issues of gender equality in most cultures. Women represent only about 3% of elected officials in Arab nations. Women represent 45% of the Swedish parliament. In Brazil, 50% of the men and women are literate. That means 50% cannot read or write. However, in Pakistan, twice as many men are literate as women. In other words, they try not to educate the women. And this has been a controversy ever since the wars in the Middle East have started. In the Netherlands, Germany, and Finland, on average, the people expressed views that men and women should be treated quite similarly. In India, Pakistan, and Nigeria, people tended to believe that roles, obligations, and rights of men and women are clearly different, with men being perceived to have more rights than women have. And that's in Pakistan, Nigeria, and India. Within a culture, men and women tended to share fairly similar views about gender equality. In India, Pakistan, and Nigeria, women tended to embrace the gender attitudes of their respective countries. It's really kind of fascinating because there's a television show about people from Nigeria. It's called Bob Loves Abishola, or Hearts Abishola, I'm sorry. It's a heart, it doesn't mean love. They couldn't put it in there and nobody would watch it. But it's really fascinating because they keep talking about the Nigerian culture and how it is so much different from the American culture. And here we have two individuals that fall in heart, whatever that means, who heart each other. And it looks like they're probably going to get married, but here we have to mesh the two cultures in order for that to happen. And of course, I don't know how long the show will last. Maybe it'll be off the air after this season, but it's really kind of fascinating. In every case, except two reversals in Malaysia and Pakistan, males have a significantly more traditional gender view than females, probably because traditional gender views benefit men more than women. We talked about this before. Why do our men, do they seem to be more dominant than women are? And one of the reasons is because of religion. The religion teaches, that's what the religions teach. So if you adhere to the Muslim religion or to the Catholic religion, then you think that women have one thing to do and men have something else to do. Women are supposed to cook and clean and raise the children, and men are supposed to go out and work and do whatever. Because that's what the religion says. The Muslim religion is the same way, of course. And of course, this is an advertisement from the 1950s. As you can see, the woman's on her knees feeding her husband breakfast in bed because he wears a Van Heusen tie. Well, of course, if you wear a Van Heusen tie, then people feed you breakfast in bed. As weird as that seems, I know.
True.
Is it? I've been wearing Van Heusen ties for a really long time, and I'll tell you what, the Colonel has never fed me breakfast in bed.
I used to wear Van Heusen shirts and life was good.
Is that what happened to you right there? Okay, well, that's amazing. You weren't even alive in the 1950s, and it still happened to you.
Talking about last year.
Last year. Countries in which a large percentage of population practiced Christianity, in particular Protestantism, were more likely to have egalitarian gender views, whereas countries with a large percentage of Muslims were associated with more traditional gender views. And the reason I have Martin Luther here is because he was the first successful Protestant, that was the first successful Protestant movement in Christianity, was Lutheranism. And that's why I have Luther up there. Oddly, more northern countries express more egalitarian views, and more southern countries express more traditional gender views. The more urbanized the country, the more likely the country will have egalitarian views. A country's individualism score correlated positively with egalitarian views. So the more individualistic it is, the more egalitarian it tends to be. And of course, that's in the United States. So if you listen to the town hall last night, that's what you were hearing. The Democratic Party tends to be fairly egalitarian. Our Republican Party tends to be less egalitarian. But of course, that was part of the debate. Who's going to be more egalitarian? Should we elect a female as the President of the United States? Should the Democrats nominate a female for the President of the United States? And there, of course, were two females on last night. The debate, there's a debate tonight from Las Vegas. I think it's going to include Mike Bloomberg, which should be interesting. Mike Bloomberg is the 7th richest man in the United States, and he's running for president. One way to look at gender and culture is to determine which gender identity is viewed to be more essentialized, which gender is thought to reflect an underlying unchangeable essence. So if we look at the two of you, both of you have on jeans. Now, are jeans for women or are jeans for men? Is that a masculine thing to wear jeans? I have on pants. We all have on pants. Wait a minute. But one of us is not a male. So, is that okay? I'll tell you what, next Monday, let's all wear dresses, all three of us. Sean likes that. That's why he's laughing.
That was a good joke.
That's what essentialized means. In the United States, being male is essentialized. We have to follow select rules. And if we don't follow those select rules, then society tells us we're incorrect. But Doris can wear pants if she wants, even though pants are more masculine than feminine. Of course, not that tight. Your pants are a little tight for guys, I guess, but
Even that too,
that's a good point.
there was actually a difference between baggy pants and what it represented.
Exactly.
And tight Wranglers.
Now, can you remember, it was like a year and a half ago, well, it's longer ago than that. If a man wore tight pants, people looked at him funny.
Yeah.
They said he had on emo pants,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And now, almost all guys are wearing tight pants.
yeah,
Yeah, unless you have to ride a horse or something.
yeah.
Yeah, see, now it's accepted, which is just fascinating to me, because women were starting to wear those yoga pants. Really, really tight pants, a lot. So, not here, of course, but if you went to Florida, or you went to Chicago, or you went to Albuquerque, you saw a lot of women wandering around
Phoenix.
with really tight, with those spandex things on. Well,
They still do.
of course they do.
Yeah.
Of course they do. But now the guys are wearing tight pants too,
Yeah, they're wearing the same thing.
but not yoga pants. They're not wearing yoga pants yet. Okay. Which gender has less flexible ways of being expressed in a socially approved way? And this has to do with being essentialized gender. And the reality is, of course, America. Does this look okay? Can men wear dresses? Is it okay if men wear dresses? Well, only in Scotland, of course, where men wear kilts, but, well, not very often. And people made fun of them. And I'll tell you what, do not make fun of a Scotsman who's wearing a kilt. Do not do it, because he has to punch you, and he will. He'll hit you as hard as he possibly can. So don't make fun of them. Just let them go. Just let them wear their skirts. Americans tend to view male gender identity to be more essentialized than female gender identity, as we just discovered. Most Americans do not seem to find it disturbing or unusual for women to present themselves like men by wearing pants, as Doris is, or having short hair, that's okay, not wearing facial makeup, nobody cares, or participating in stereotypically male behaviors like girls playing hockey or playing with trucks. And of course, if you look at these two pictures, which one looks weirder? The lady on the left, who is actually a member of the USA hockey team, or the guy on the right? Does he look okay, or does she look weirder, or does he look weirder?
He looks weird.
He does look weird, doesn't he? That blue just does not go with his eyes. This is really strange.
With a nice, had a breast.
Showing too much cleavage.
I know. Yeah, he's got too much cleavage showing. That's a problem too. Many Americans do find it disturbing or unusual for men to present themselves as women, wearing dresses, high heels, or lipstick. I can remember back in the 70s and 80s when men started wearing makeup. Rock stars started wearing makeup. I can remember David Bowie Bowie, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Anyway, he really got slammed for wearing eye makeup. And then all of a sudden, Alice Cooper, and then all of a sudden,
Kiss.
Marilyn
Manson.
Manson.
Kiss.
Yeah, okay.
Kiss.
And Kiss, yeah, Kiss had all that makeup on. I don't know how feminine it was. Men started having long hair. How unacceptable was that? Well, when it first started in the 1960s with the Beatles, when they had that long hairdo, which isn't long for today. I mean, this is a Beatle haircut, and that looks okay for this kid to have. But back then, of course, if you had anything other than a crew cut, then you were thought to be a sissy. And it, you know, everything changed, everything evolved over time. And of course, we have just talked about how tight pants have evolved for men. And I just bought a pair of tight pants and I'll be wearing them next week, so. I know, Doris is embarrassed.
I blame
Who?
marijuana.
Marijuana?
Yeah.
On tight pants?
Yeah, all
Okay.
the styles throughout the decades.
Blame it on marijuana. Well, we've had marijuana certainly since the 60s, so maybe all of these changes in style have something to do with marijuana. That's a possibility, I guess. What are we talking about? Oh, so should men do ballet? Should men play with dolls? Should males play with dolls? And of course now there are dolls that males are supposed to play with. G.I. Joe, of course there's no G.I. Joe anymore, but there are dolls that men play with. Action figures, Iron Man. And so you see the little boys playing with toys all the time, these toys that are actually dolls.
But they didn't have hair to comb or things to dress them up with. It was all like action weapons and stuff like that.
Okay. Oh, you played with these things. Okay.
Yeah, I had a real big old nice commando toy.
I think he's
Awesome.
he's a sissy. I never played with dolls when I was a kid.
It was a Christmas gift. What was I supposed to do with it?
Yeah, what do you had to play with it. You didn't have a choice. Male identity is less changeable and thus more essentialized in the American culture than the female identity is. However, we don't have the only culture that exists. In Hindu myths, many more male gods change into female goddesses than female goddesses change into gods. The Hindu religion involves goddess worship, and many of the most powerful gods are female. Kali, Parvati, Durga, and Maya are three of them. As you can see, this is Kali. One of her arms carries a sword. And what does she do with the sword? She decapitates people. That's a decapitating sword. According to the Hindu religion, female identity is viewed as pure and strong and powerful. Well, you can see the heads. She's cut the heads off. That's Kali right there, with her tongue stuck out. Just like, wait a minute, Shakira at the Super Bowl. Didn't she stick her tongue out? At the Super Bowl. I don't know what that had to do with. But maybe she was trying to be Kali. In India, the male gender identity has more mutable and is more essentialized than the female gender. And of course, that's what Kali looks like. That's what Parvati looks like. That's what Durga looks like. There you go. She's got a sword too. And she's riding on a lion, not somebody to mess with. And that's Maya right there.
I was saying that the reason why she was doing that to her tongue was because it represented the war cry, but then it also, that war cry is also utilized in some of the tribes in Mexico.
Did she ululated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she stuck out her tongue with, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
See, that ululation is also something that they do in North Africa. And also the tribes up north will do that.
Yeah.
I
So,
thought about that, she's supporting the immigrants or Mexicans
Oh, okay.
because of what Trump is doing.
okay, well that's,
That's how I thought about it.
can't argue with that. I agree with her more than I agree with him, that's for sure. I agree with just about anybody other than Donald Trump at this point. Okay, so she was supporting the immigrants. I think that's a good idea. And that was a war cry. It was a war cry trying to get people to come out and vote in the next election. Good idea. Festinger in 1957 proposed that people have a powerful motivation to be consistent, and their cognitive dissonance is the distressing feeling we have when we observe ourselves acting inconsistently. And of course, we don't want to do that. So the beginning of this semester, I came to class one morning and I went out, I can't remember why I went out to the coffee shop, but there was a starving cat. There was a starving cat underneath one of the tables, and everybody was just walking past it like nobody cared. And of course that was, I had to go and help that cat. And so I brought it in here and I fed it and I gave it some milk, and it didn't eat hardly anything. It's starving to death. This cat had, you could see all of its bones. Looked like a skeleton with fur on it. And its ears were frozen. So I brought it in and I fed it. Then I took it back to my office and I took it home at lunch, which reminds me I forgot to let the animals out at lunch. But anyway, whoops. I took it home and I fed it and everything was fine. And I still have that cat. Why? Well, that's consistent with my ideals. My ideals are that that cat shouldn't starve to death, and we shouldn't watch it starve to death. It just hurts my feelings. It's the same way with Margaret and her dogs. You know, Margaret tries to save all the dogs on the reservation. Well, I just couldn't let that cat starve to death. It was brutal looking. And here it's 6 weeks later, and the cat still hasn't gained that much weight. I didn't think it was going to live past the first couple hours, but it ate really slow, and now it's starting to put on a little bit of weight. And it jumped another cat, a tomcat was outside, and it jumped him the other day. So maybe that's a good sign that he wants to fight. What are we talking about? So that has to do with cognitive dissonance. If I had just let the cat go, if I had not tried to help the cat, if I had ignored the cat like everybody else was doing, then see, that would be cognitive dissonance. I couldn't do that. And so I helped the cat. That's on the tape. The belief that we can easily change and are expected to change is referred to as an incremental theory of self. Traits are malleable and can be improved. So if you do something wrong and you don't like something about yourself, you can actually change yourself. But of course it has to be done incrementally, in baby steps, and that's okay, as long as you change something that isn't right. We've all changed from high school. In high school, our cohorts in high school, they had different ideas. I've told you that I grew up in a community, and they were educating us to be factory workers, and most of the people that I went to high school with became factory workers. And then the factories closed, and now all these guys either retired young and now are struggling, or they did something else. But of course I was seen as there was something wrong with me because I went to college instead of going into the factory, and they made a lot more money than I did. They were making more money when the factories closed. They were making more money then than I'm making right now. But that's okay, because, well, but you have to change from high school. Maybe you were cool in high school. Maybe you were a smoker and a drinker in high school.
Bully.
And a bully. Maybe you're a bully like Doris was in high school. And now you're not. Now you've changed. That person that you were is not the person you are today. And you see this a lot with alcohol, with people drinking alcohol. It's one of the reasons that I consider alcohol an adolescent problem. And if you're a 50-year-old man and you're still drinking alcohol, you're acting like a kid. You're acting like a teenager. This is something stupid that teenagers do, and you shouldn't still be drinking.
But then the reason why teenagers drink is because they see older people.
So that they can look older, exactly. That is absolutely correct. And if we watch television shows, especially old movies, everybody's drinking. Everybody is, and that's the adult thing to do. My mother told me a story that she went out with my dad, and the two of them became a couple, and he took her to his brother's house, his older brother. He's the youngest in his family. He took her to his older brother's house, and they drank Manhattans. This is during Prohibition too. They drank Manhattans, and she felt really adult. And then afterwards, she questioned herself. Well, why am I doing this? I didn't even like it. It tasted really bad. She'd never drunk before, but she did it so that she would feel older and seem older to the people around her. And she, at that point, she decided that she wasn't going to do that kind of stuff anymore. She had already rebelled against society in different other aspects. One of them was going to church. My mother tried going to all the churches, and there were some churches she liked and some churches she didn't like. The churches she didn't like were the ones who tried to tell her what to do. But the church she liked was the one that had the best music. She was going for the music. But then she realized, well, this is silly. Why in the world would I go to church for music? I can just turn on the radio and listen to music. So she decided not to go to church anymore. And then she married my dad, who was a Methodist, and so she tried going to the Methodist church. And she was okay until they tried to tell her what to do. And at that point, she called them all flavors of a son of a bitch and left. She was mad. And even to this day, even before she died, she would, if she talked about the Methodist church, the word son of a bitch always came up. She always used that. And it wasn't just that preacher, it was the whole damn church. Okay. I won't tell you what other words she used. Son of a bitch was kind of the nice word that she used to refer to this guy. Aspects of the self are largely resistant to change, which is known as the entity theory of self. Individuals with this view see their attitudes to be largely inborn. They don't see that they can change. They think that every aspect of their life is set in stone. And that is the entity theory of the self. So if we look at these two individuals, the entity theory is, he sees that his world is set in stone, and she sees hers as evolving. And there are a lot of people that think that everything should always be the same. These are more traditional people. These are people that go to church and do the same thing every week. They don't ever change. Nothing ever is different than it was before. But there are other individuals that are always looking for the next thing, the next change. And those are the individuals with incremental self-theories. The entity theory, of course, sees the world set in stone. But the reality is, of course, the world's going to change whether you go along with it or not. You're just going to be left behind. So I get to wear my emo pants next week, because that's the style, and I'll be with it.
Are you having boots on?
No boots. I wear my running shoes. I have to walk all the way down to the damn fob, so.
You should wear cowboy boots with it.
I cannot wear cowboy boots. Cowboy boots do not fit my feet. I have a foot that's shaped like a fan, okay? My toes are a lot wider than my heel is, as you can see.
Size EE.
I'm a double E. I'm a double E. And because of that, I can't wear cowboy boots. They don't make cowboy boots that look like this. Cowboy boots look like this. And I can't wear them. If I wore cowboy boots, they would be this wide.
But if you wear cowboy boots, your foot will slowly come back in.
No, it won't. I'm 70 years old. I don't think my feet are going to change.
If Wilson or Ronald can do it, I'm sure you can do it.
He's just started wearing cowboy boots?
No, he's been wearing cowboy boots
All of his life.
all his life.
Exactly. but his feet are not shaped like mine. He's got Indian feet like you've got. Little skinny things and little short things. Your feet are like this big. What size shoe do you wear?
9.5.
9.5.
Yeah.
I wear a 12.5.
It don't seem like it.
It's a 12.5. You want me to take it off so you can read it?
Actually, yeah, take it off and put your foot beside the shoe. I want to see how much.
Well, here's my toe. My toe's right there.
Oh, okay.
See that yellow spot?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just below the yellow spot. That's where my toe is. I usually have to wear wider shoes because my foot's so wide. And if I wear 12s, if my foot's really 11.5, it stretches the 12 out so it pulls the toe in.
Let me see it then. Stand right there. Oh, yeah.
Look how skinny your foot is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, slender. Did I say skinny? I meant slender. Tiny, tiny little feet. But my people were coal miners in England, and we were coal miners for hundreds of years. So we're short, we're broad, and we've got big feet, so that we can swing the pick.
Kind of like hobbits on Lord of the Rings.
Like hobbits, Lord of the Rings. I've been called a hobbit before. Isn't that tragic? Research found that 60% of the Chinese high school students said that the key to success in math is to study hard. So there you go. If you were Chinese, you would take your math class and you would just study as hard as you possibly could. In contrast, less than 25% of American high school students felt this way. Japanese believe more than Americans that intelligence is based on how hard you try rather than on what you are born with. Oh, whoops, I went the wrong way. So Americans are more like this as far as math is concerned. They think you're either smart in math or not. But the Chinese think all you need to do is work hard. And the Japanese are the same way. If you work hard, you can pass it. To get into a good American university, you typically need to get an acceptable score on your SAT test. The SAT, actually, the T stands for test. The SAT was originally designed to measure innate aptitudes and not efforts in one's classes. So it didn't matter what classes you took the SAT test and you did well. If you either did well or you did poorly, but it meant that you had an aptitude to go to college is what it was supposed to mean. But now people study the SAT test. And since they study the SAT test, SAT, they get a better grade. And it's really screwed up what the SAT was supposed to do. It turns out that studying hard can increase one's SAT score significantly. This has been a source of frustration for the test makers because the tests are no longer serving the function they were originally designed for, which has sparked much policy debate about their utility. So in the old days, the college admissions people would look at the SAT score. They'd look at the SAT score and say, hey, this guy has an aptitude for going to college. Well, we can't do that anymore. And the reason we can't is because you can jack up your SAT score by studying. And of course, that's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to say what your aptitude is for learning, but it doesn't. And of course, we get surprised and shocked from time to time because we will admit somebody with a really high SAT score, and then they just can't handle college work. They can't. And the reason is because they studied their SAT. IQ tests are regularly given in public schools in the States, and the results influence decisions on whether students should attend gifted or remedial classes. In Japan, to get into a good university, you need to do well on university entrance exams that test your mastery of large amounts of material. So they don't give they don't have IQ tests in Japan. We have them in the United States, but we don't have them, or they don't have them in Japan. Japan's really kind of an interesting country. The Japanese bar exam to become a lawyer is notoriously difficult. Only 2.5% of people pass it every year, and those who do on average have failed the exam 4 times before ultimately succeeding, and you can't take it more than once a year. So here you've got a guy that goes through law school. What's the probability of him passing? Is 2.5%. So he's got a 97.5% chance of failing. He has to take the test 4 times. So he graduates from law school, and he's not going to get a law degree for at least 4 years. They almost never pass it on the first go-around. Nobody does. Well, it happens, but it's very rare. If we look at lawyers in the United States, approximately 2/3 of those taking the American bar exam each year pass the test. 2/3 of them pass the test. 67%, with about 3/4 of them passing it on the first attempt. So in Japan, nobody passes on the first shot. In the United States, almost everybody passes it on the first shot. As weird as that may sound. Okay. So there is a difference between them and us. Either their test is a lot harder than ours, or we study for the exam, which is the way it works. We do study for the exam. The 5-factor model of personality, it was started as a personality profile test developed to test U.S. Air Force officers in the 1950s by Tupes and Crystal. And this was in they actually published in 1961. But in the 1950s, they came up with this 5-factor model. What they were trying to do, they were trying to figure out who would be a good Air Force officer. If you remember, before 1950, the Air Force was part of the Army. So Air Force officers are actually Army officers. And Army officers, of course, they needed to do different things than Air Force officers did. In the Air Force, your officers are the ones who do the fighting. Enlisted personnel very rarely fight. And the reason is because, well, the officers fly the airplanes. And that's what the Air Force is all about, is fighting with airplanes. Well, enlisted personnel don't fly airplanes. So they very rarely fight. So they needed different personality efficiency in the United States Air Force than they did in the Army. They needed people who could handle, not only that, but in the 1950s, everybody was flying jets. They weren't flying, so they needed quick reflexes. Whereas before, the reflexes didn't really matter that much. All they needed was the ability to fly. But all of a sudden, they're flying jets. And jets are a lot more complex than propeller-driven aircraft. And because of that, they needed different personalities. So they contracted with Tupes and Crystal, and they came up with a 5-factor model. Tupes and Crystal used factor analysis to determine which of Cattell's 16 personality factors were significant. They came up with 5. And this is what Cattell's 16 personality factors looked like. Warmth, reasoning, emotional stability, dominance, liveliness, rule consciousness, social boldness, sensitivity, vigilance, attractiveness, privateness, apprehension, openness to change, self-reliance, perfectionism, and tension. Now, this is the model that the Army used when they were doing personality profile tests for their officers. But Tupes and Crystal needed something different. The Air Force wanted something a little bit faster, and so they came up with a 5-factor model. And these are the factors that they came up with. Openness to experience reflects a person's intelligence and curiosity about the world, so they were looking for openness to experience. Conscientiousness indicates how responsible and dependable an individual is. Extroversion indicates how much an individual is active and dominant. And of course, even though they didn't really boss people around in the Air Force as much, they still needed extroversion and they still needed dominance. Agreeableness is to the extent to which a person tends to be warm and pleasant. Agreeableness, so would you need an officer that was agreeable? Or would you want an officer that was mean?
Agreeable?
So you want somebody that's a pleasant person,
Yeah,
okay, to be your officer.
yeah.
Yeah, well, you probably would, but if you want somebody to boss people around, you want somebody that's not agreeable, okay?
Because I basically would be bumping heads with the bossy person.
You would, yeah. Then they'd just kick you out,
Yeah,
and we wouldn't worry about it anymore.
yeah.
Okay. We'd board you right out of the service,
Which is the reason why I never went to.
which is a reason why you never went into the service, which is a good idea. I'm glad you didn't go. Neuroticism is the degree to which an individual can be seen as emotionally stable and unpredictable. Of course, you want your Air Force officers to be mentally stable, hopefully. The five-factor model proposes that all personality traits largely reflect some combination of these five core traits. So the Air Force were trying to determine how they could find people that would fit their needs as compared to the Army. And of course it was very, very different because the Air Force mission was completely different than the Army's mission. They still needed to boss people around. They still needed to be dominant, but they also needed the characteristics to be able to fly very rapid, very fast airplanes. All personality traits should show a significant correlation with at least one, if not more, of these core traits. So they started out, oops, I went the wrong direction. They started out with these, with Catel's 16. This is what they started out with, and they ended up with 5. Then they realized, wait a minute, these 5 traits, some of these are not necessary. Well, as a matter of fact, most of these are not necessary. We just need the 5-factor model. So then, back in the 80s, somebody looked at Cattell, or Tupy's and Crystal's model, and they said, well, these fit everybody. These should fit everybody. And of course, it fit people in the United States, but it didn't fit other people. There we go. The 5 factors can be seen to reflect the basic structure of personality, especially in the United States. There's a question as to how well the 5-factor structure generalizes elsewhere, and the reality is this fits individualism in the United States, doesn't really fit other countries as well as in the United States. An analysis of indigenous Chinese personality trait terms found a set of factors that were not the same as the big 5. Rather, 4 factors emerged that were captured by the following labels. Dependability. Now remember, China is collectivistic. So they're going to be different than people in the United States. Dependability, reflecting responsibility. Optimism and trustworthiness in a collective society. Everybody needs to be dependable and responsible. Interpersonal relatedness, reflecting harmony, thrift, relational orientation, and tradition. In the United States, you can be the biggest jerk that you want to be, but in China, where you have so many people and it's so crowded, if you're that big jerk, then somebody's going to kill you, or you're going to have conflict. But in China, you don't want this because it's just too crowded a country. So you need harmony rather than individualism. Social potency, reflecting leadership, adventurousness, and extroversion, very similar to the United States. And individualism, strangely enough, but they saw individualism differently, reflecting logical orientation, in other words, being logical, being defensive, and self-orientation, having a self-orientation. Now they've done this all over the world. They've used the 5-factor model. And what they discovered was that other cultures have different factors. Similar approaches have been taken in other cultures. Researchers looking at Filipino personality traits discovered 2 additional traits to the big 5. This is bizarre because they had exactly the same traits as we did in the Philippines. Now remember, we controlled the Philippines from 1898 until 1945, right after World War II. We gave them their independence in 1945. So yeah, they would reflect the United States since we put our educational system over there. But still, they've got, and if you look at the Philippines is hundreds of islands. It's hundreds of different tribal groupings all over the Philippines. So their personality traits are not the same as ours. And what they discovered was that, yeah, they have the big five, but they have two other different traits. And one of them was temperamentalness. In other words, being spoiled, being temperamental. And the other one was a negative valence dimension. A negative valence dimension means that these individuals would act grouchy toward people so that they could control them. And this was a positive personality trait that you saw in the Philippines. So if you had an individual that wanted to control people around them, they would act negatively toward that individual so that this individual would try to do something positive toward them so that they would appreciate them more, as weird as that is. I know, we would see it as narcissism in the United States. We would identify that as narcissism. But in the Philippines, this is a positive trait, this negative valence dimension, as weird as that is. But of course, we looked at other countries as well. In an investigation of 11 different language groups in South Africa, it revealed 9 underlying factors, some of which overlapped with the big 5, but the other factors that did not. One of them was integrity, was very important in South Africa. And the other was relationship harmony. Now this is really kind of weird. In the United States, of course, if you're Navajo, you're Navajo. And if you're, here. And if you're white, you're white. And if you're black, black is beautiful. If you're Hispanic, and harmony is not really as important as the fact that you adhere to your own culture. This is really important. But in Africa, this is in South Africa, where we're looking at 11 different language groups, harmony was extremely important. It's the only way they could get along. Now, you remember South Africa had a problem with apartheid. In other words, the white people were really prejudiced against anybody that wasn't white. And it really didn't matter what degree of non-white you were, they didn't like you and they treated you badly. So in order for all those non-white people to get along with each other, they needed to develop this concept of this relationship of harmony. So if you go down there, the black people don't really attack each other. They attack white people. And the white people attack the black people, but at least the black people aren't attacking each other. They see what is negative and they attack what is negative. Isn't that strange? And if you watch a South African movie, that's exactly what you're going to see. So the white people don't trust anybody that's not white, because they think they band together, and in essence they're looking for harmony.
I think for us around here, what brings us harmony between us and neighboring tribe would be casino and Walmart.
Who goes to the Navajo casino? Most besides Doris. It's mostly other Navajos, isn't that? Aren't most of the people there Navajos?
No,
Not
different
for
kind.
Twin Arrows.
Oh, is that right?
Hope he's going that way.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Spending all their money, huh?
And then I think in Fire Rock, you have the Zunies coming up.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty far away for them to come up. I just assumed they
There's
were.
the casino down that way.
See, I never go to casinos, so I don't know these things. You guys need to write all this stuff down. Doris, next time you're there, write down all the people that you see.
And
Then
then
there's another one after that.
there's Honda.
Honda
Apache
is this
Navajo.
way. It's Apache.
Oh, it's Apache.
So
I don't know which direction.
And then,
You're pointing north, aren't you?
no, south.
Is that south?
Yeah. Go south.
Wait a minute.
South is this way.
No, that's
East is this way.
west.
West is this way.
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of. That's where the back door is. Okay. You guys got me confused.